As she knelt by the lakeside, crying and searching for Leothan's drawings, I had just received a video from a notorious overseas criminal network base. The screams of her lover and son having their organs harvested sounded just like my son's cries before he died. I deleted the video and called the rescue team. There's a female body at the bottom of the lake, clutching a drawing. It's the family portrait my son drew for his 7th birthday. When the earthquake struck, I used all my strength to hold back the steel plate, shielding my wife. She crawled out of the ruins. Dad, I hurt so much. What's happening to me? I really hurt. The 5-year-old had no clear concept of death, only repeated his questions, his voice growing weaker each time. My eyes were bloodshot. I forced back tears and managed a smile. My Leo Thorne is a brave boy. Can you hold on a little longer? Mom will bring people to rescue us soon. The space after the quake was pitch black. A heavy scent of blood filled the increasingly thin air. I knew Leo Thorne was injured. When the earthquake first hit, a falling rebar had already pierced his abdomen, and the latest aftershock must have torn his wound even worse. Ignoring the massive stone crushing my waist, I pressed one hand against Leothan's abdomen, and used the other to push upwards, trying to create more space for him. But Leo Thorne cried. This child, who usually didn't cry even when scraping his knees, now had glistening tears streaking his dust-smudged little face. His small body trembled as he asked me, Dad, you're lying. Mom, isn't she abandoning us again? I heard her say, Uncle Julian. I was speechless, wanting to comfort him but unable to utter a single word, because Leo Thorne was telling the truth. When the disaster struck, I shielded my wife Vivian Hayes beneath me, then used all my strength to hold back the falling slabs. But after she escaped the ruins, she didn't immediately go to find help for Leo Thorne and me. Instead, she led the rescue team towards the direction where her first love, Julian Vance, was in trouble. I couldn't understand how she could be so heartless. She only survived until now because I gave her my share of food and water. I thought to myself, as a man, I could still hold on. And now that Ethan Vance was immobile and in critical condition, urgently needing medical attention, I placed all hope of rescue on Vivian Hayes. I fought with all my might to prop up the ruins, desperately digging at the crevices above, yet, I never imagined my wife of 7 years could be so cruel. Gritting my teeth, I screamed hysterically at her, my voice hoarse from days without water. Vivian Hayes, what are you doing? Go get someone to rescue us. Save Leo Thorne. I beg you. Leo Thorne, he's fading. Vivian Hayes turned and walked away, unfazed, her voice dripping with disdain from a distance. You've all held on this long, would a little longer kill you? She didn't know Leothan's small hand was already growing cold. Leo Thorne, he really was fading. I could only watch helplessly as she led the approaching rescue team in another direction. No matter how much I screamed, she never looked back. I looked down at Leo Thorne, whose face was growing paler, and a profound sense of fear and panic enveloped me. How I wished I could bear all of this for him. My Leo Thorne, he was so young, he should have a bright future, not be here. Suddenly, a soft, cold little hand tapped my palm. Dad, Dad, you've worked so hard. But Leo Thorne is so tired. Leothan's voice grew fainter and fainter, gradually losing his last spark of life. My tears could no longer be held back. Weeping, I shook my head repeatedly. Leo Thorne, Dad isn't tired, not at all. Please open your eyes and look at Dad. But the only response was the increasingly limp body in my arms. I desperately tried to staunch Leothan's wound, but blood continued to seep between my fingers. As his breathing grew faint, I heard Leo Thorne softly murmur his last words. Why doesn't Mom love me? In that instant, my world completely collapsed. When I woke up again, I was at the hospital. I stumbled out of bed, rushed out of the room, and grabbed the hand of the nurse on duty, my eyes red. I begged her to tell me where Leo Thorne was. The nurse froze for a moment, then led me to the intensive care unit entrance. She sighed softly. He was brought in too late. Even 5 minutes earlier, there would have been hope. Go be with him for his last moments. I am sorry. With tear-filled eyes, I went to Leothan's side. He, who had once been so full of life, now lay on the hospital bed as if he were made of paper, on a ventilator. His breathing was barely audible. I held his cold little hand, choking back tears. Leo Thorne, Dad's here, don't be scared anymore. Leo Thorne didn't open his eyes, but his lips seemed to be softly murmuring something. I leaned closer and vaguely heard Leo Thorne saying, Dad, I really want to see Mom again. I was sobbing, unable to speak. Clinging to a last sliver of hope, I shakily dialed the phone. Unsurprisingly, 3 calls went unanswered. As Leothan's breathing grew fainter, the 4th call finally connected. Vivian Hayes, Leo Thorne wants to see you. Before I could finish, an impatient female voice snapped from the other end. Marcus Thorne, Ethan Vance is so scared he's talking nonsense and is still just using your son to lie. Can't you stop being so unreasonable? Ethan Vance was the son of Vivian Hayes' first love. Her son was just startled, but what about mine? Did he deserve to be pierced by a rebar and bleed to death? The long simmering rage erupted at that moment. I roared into the phone. I said, Leo Thorne is dying. He wants to see you one last time. Are you even human? There was no panic on her end. Instead, she raised her voice and cursed me. Marcus Thorne, how dare you yell at me now? And curse your own child to death. He was perfectly fine during the earthquake. I think the one who's not human. With that, she angrily hung up the phone. I turned back to look at Leo Thorne, and the EKG monitor was a flat line. Until his death, he never got to see the mother he longed for. Not even a single word of concern. Vivian Hayes had always been cold and strict with Leo Thorne, but he never seemed to mind. In fact, when I tried to reason with Vivian Hayes about it, he would secretly comfort me. Dad, it's okay. It must be because I am not good enough. That's why Mom is like this. I'll keep trying. Even though he said that, I knew how deeply he yearned for that maternal love. He didn't know it wasn't because he wasn't good enough. It's just that not every mother loves her own child. He also didn't know that while he was in critical condition, his mother was meticulously caring for another child who was merely startled. I clenched my fists, looked at the fluorescent lights, and laughed as tears streamed down my face. How I wished it had been earlier. Leo Thorne was so close to being saved. But Vivian Hayes preferred to check on someone else's child, who was safe, rather than give Leo Thorne a single glance. Was only her first love's child considered a child, and mine wasn't? From the moment Leo Thorne died, my marriage to Vivian Hayes was irrevocably over. From now on, I would feel nothing but hatred for her. I didn't tell Vivian Hayes when Leo Thorne was cremated, because I felt she was already unworthy of being Leo Thorne's mother, and unworthy of being near my son's memory. After the incident, I held onto a last shred of hope and asked the rescue team if Vivian Hayes had told them there were people here after she got out, who would have thought that woman, Vivian Hayes, was so afraid of delaying her first love's rescue time. So she chose to lie, shaking her head and denying anyone else was here, frantically pulling the rescue team in another direction. She claimed there were people who needed help over there. This was why rescue efforts in our area were so delayed. Everyone outside, due to Vivian Hayes' words, simply assumed there was no one beneath that rubble. Yet, Vivian Hayes herself had become the focus of extensive promotional reports. Everyone believed she had climbed out through sheer resilience. She even actively organized rescue efforts afterward. The media hailed her as a miracle of the earthquake. Hearing all this, I could barely believe my ears. I scoffed out loud then and there, actively organizing rescue, yet she wasn't willing to save her own flesh and blood son. This rage reached its peak when I arrived at the hospital and saw Vivian Hayes fussing over the chubby boy lying in the hospital bed. That scared, speechless child from the phone call was now gleefully playing his handheld game console. From his plump chin and cheerful expression, there was no trace of him being terrified. I remembered my own Leo Thorne when he passed away, so tragically thin because he hadn't eaten properly for days. Rage surged within me. Vivian Hayes, however, seemed not to notice my presence, asking Ethan Vance if he wanted an orange one moment, then if he wanted water the next. She was being overly attentive. Unable to bear it any longer, I stepped forward, pulled her aside, and roared, Vivian Hayes, don't you have your own child? Why are you so eager to play mother to someone else's child here? Aren't you shameless? Only then did Vivian Hayes look at me directly, rubbing her arm, and retorted angrily, what's wrong with you? Ethan Vance just recovered. What if you scare him? No sooner had she spoken than the child on the bed burst into timely wails. Vivian Hayes rushed over and gently soothed him. It's okay, Ethan Vance. Don't be scared. Don't be scared. She had never shown such a gentle expression to Leo Thorne. We had always assumed she was naturally expressionless, simply disliking showing emotion. But it wasn't that at all. It was just that we weren't the objects of her affection. I sneered. How can there be such a cold-hearted mother in this world as you? All those days after the earthquake, did you once ask about me or your son? Did you ask how Leo Thorne was? As I spoke, I stepped forward again, and snatched the handheld game console from the chubby boy, venting the rage in my chest. And you, kid, what are you crying about? Scared but still able to play games. Huh. No mother of your own, so you try to steal someone else's, don't you? Vivian Hayes, however, suddenly blocked my path, glaring at me like a fierce mother protecting her chick. Why are you being so mean to a child? Take it out on me. So what if I didn't care about you too? You're perfectly fine standing here, aren't you? Can't you pick a better time for your jealousy? You even tried to lie to me about Leo Thorne before, and I haven't even settled that score. No lie, I cut her off directly. She frowned. No lie about what? My nails dug into my flesh as I stared directly at her. I didn't lie to you. Leo Thorne is dead. Vivian Hayes froze for a moment, then immediately looked at me, laughing in her fury. Here we go again, trying to get back at me, repeating a lie over and over. Is that fun, Marcus Thorne? This woman was truly beyond saving. I looked at Vivian Hayes, giving up on explanations. I just threw the divorce papers in her face. It's all over. Let's get divorced. Vivian Hayes. To my surprise, the woman in front of me suddenly screamed frantically, her face full of disbelief. You're divorcing me just because I didn't rescue you during the earthquake? How childish are you? You're still standing here perfectly fine. Why are you suddenly being dramatic? Seeing Vivian Hayes' complete lack of remorse, I couldn't help but slap her, roaring, not only did you not save me, you didn't even want to save your own biological child. Do you know Leo Thorne was just minutes away from that critical rescue window? You didn't even bother to see him one last time. By the end, my eyes were red, and I glared fiercely at the person in front of me, as if sensing something was wrong. The usually domineering Vivian Hayes suddenly went limp, her face pale. She opened her mouth as if to ask me something. It was then that Julian Vance, who had been out of sight, finally appeared. He immediately stepped in front of Vivian Hayes, looking at me with great indignation. Vivian Hayes was just too worried about me, that's all. Marcus Thorne, why are you hitting a woman? It's all Ethan Vance's and my fault. Take it out on me instead. Don't worry, I have no intention of letting you off either. I directly swung my fist into his face, driven by accumulated hatred, landing punch after punch. Ever since Julian Vance returned to the country, he had frequently appeared before Vivian Hayes, presenting himself as a disheartened single father. He used such pitiful tactics repeatedly. What he wanted was obvious, yet Vivian Hayes paid no mind, always telling me that I was cold-hearted and saw dirt everywhere. She claimed he had just returned and needed help. She also said that a family without a mother was truly pitiable and needed her constant support. Vivian Hayes' indulgence fueled Julian Vance's increasing audacity. From occasional overnight stays, he eventually just moved in permanently. There was even a time for Leothan's birthday. His only wish was for his mother to be with him. That was also his last birthday on Earth. Vivian Hayes had promised wholeheartedly, but then changed her mind at the last minute, and went to Julian Vance's house. She said Ethan Vance had a fever and needed her care, and she'd return once he was stable. My poor Leo Thorne sat alone at the table, watching the lit candle, stubbornly waiting for hour after hour. He didn't eat a single bite of cake, nor did he see any sign of his mother. In the end, I had to gently carry a weeping Leo Thorne to bed and put him to sleep, because I knew Vivian Hayes wouldn't be coming back. It was that very night that I received a provocative text message from Julian Vance. Vivian Hayes will be a good mother. The accompanying picture showed Vivian Hayes gently coaxing Ethan Vance to sleep that evening, a heartwarming scene, yet it was blindingly painful. Seeing Julian Vance not retaliate, Vivian Hayes rushed to hug him, all her previous vulnerability and wavering completely gone. With red eyes, she shouted at me, "Don't hit someone who's injured. Julian Vance just recovered, how could you do that?" I scoffed, a sarcastic smile playing on my lips. The gauze on his arm, which I had just hit, was already bleeding through. Her tone softened instantly. "Are you hurt?" I wasn't hurt. Did she think I would fake an injury by wrapping myself in gauze and bandages? I ignored Vivian Hayes' sudden feigned concern and continued, "You certainly have the nerve to stand by and watch my son and me get buried alive in the ruins, and then simply walk away. And regarding the divorce, I am not asking for your opinion, I am informing you. If you refuse, then I'll see you in court." Watching Vivian Hayes' face grow increasingly ugly, I walked over to Julian Vance, who was still looking down, his face bruised. I swept my gaze between him and his son, then sneeringly patted his face. And using my money, was that fun? Don't worry, he'll make sure you and your son spit every single cent back out. Having said that, I turned and walked towards the door. From behind me, Vivian Hayes' defiant threat rang out. If you dare step out that door, even if you beg me later, I won't come back. Without a trace of hesitation, I quickly walked out the door. Even from a distance, I could still hear voices from inside. Aunt Vivian, if that other boy wasn't around, would you be my mom forever? Ethan Vance's voice was filled with poorly concealed glee, and Julian Vance's feigned comfort. Vivian Hayes, don't be sad. Marcus Thorne is probably just doing this because he wants your attention. His words seemed to embolden Vivian Hayes greatly. She said disdainfully, he's just being dramatic. Just wait a few days, and he'll be begging me to come back. Besides, I know him too well. Even if it's for Leo Thorne to have a complete family, he won't actually divorce me. Just you wait. When he comes back begging, I'll make him buy you and Ethan Vance an apartment as an apology. Listening to all this, I simply took out my cell phone and coldly gave Sarah Davis an instruction. Sarah, cut off all of Vivian Hayes' bank cards and any financial support related to her. The madams. She won't be my wife much longer, and I don't want to repeat myself. The other end quickly assented. Actually, given Vivian Hayes' family background, she wouldn't have been a match for me originally, but what boy doesn't have a first love during his school days? Coincidentally, Vivian Hayes, with her pure and lovely appearance, became the first love of most boys in our high school. Of course, that included me. It was just that Julian Vance was always by her side back then, the two of them inseparable. I simply took it as a secret crush that would come to nothing. It wasn't until later, when I started my own business from scratch, owned my own company, and even became a rising business magnate sought after by everyone at a certain banquet. Vivian Hayes was simply pushed in front of me by her parents. Over the years, there had been no shortage of women sent my way. What Vivian Hayes' parents intended was obvious, but perhaps it was the first love filter. I was different with Vivian Hayes, always exceptionally lenient. She barely had to do anything before I agreed to her marriage proposal. I even convinced myself that her relationship with Julian Vance was merely a budding affection from their naive youth. After we married, I provided her with the best within my means. She ate the finest food, wore the best clothes, and lived in places designed to her liking. Even though she was never particularly enthusiastic towards me or our child, from beginning to end, who knew that Julian Vance's return to the country would slap me hard with reality? She took my money to support an unemployed man who had just returned from overseas, and a child who wasn't hers by birth, and she even called it caring for a poor, newly widowed single-parent family. My affection for her gradually eroded with each of her nights spent away from home. How many times did I want a divorce? But seeing Leothan's desperate yearning for a mother's love, I gave up. I endured it again and again, only to end up with her heartlessly choosing to save another child and abandon Leo Thorne. Had I known, I should have left with Leo Thorne much earlier. Since she was so keen on being someone else's mother, I'd help her along that path. After all, someone had to pay for my son's death. A few days later, Vivian Hayes, who had always been so high and mighty, contacted me. When she saw the divorce summons sent to her by the corporate lawyer and realized her bank card could no longer access a single cent, she finally panicked. She broke down and screamed at me over the phone. Marcus Thorne, do you really have to be so ruthless? Have you considered how I am going to live now? I knew there was half a sentence she hadn't uttered. How are Julian Vance and Ethan Vance going to live now? After all, that father and son had always lived off her money, and they had quite an appetite. Using the money Vivian Hayes got from me, they rented a luxury home and drove luxury cars, so I decided to sue Julian Vance as well, for a total of $3 million. Her breakdown this time was likely also instigated by Julian Vance and his son, pushing her to squeeze more money out of me. Because the divorce papers I gave her stipulated that she would leave with nothing, if she didn't agree, I could proceed with normal legal procedures. I had the top legal team in the country, and her years of documented absences from home would make charges of infidelity and cohabitation a straightforward case against them, and on their side, they had nothing. Hearing Vivian Hayes break down, I was in a rare good mood. I smiled faintly and simply countered, and when you left Leo Thorne and me in the ruins, did you consider how we were going to live? With that, I hung up the phone. Soon, news of my impending divorce from Vivian Hayes spread throughout the business circles. After many days, she and I met again. This time, however, her parents were with her. Vivian Hayes herself was disheveled, her eyes glistening with tears. As soon as she saw me, she clung to my suit sleeve, asking repeatedly, "Leo Thorne, Leo Thorne. Tell me, he's not dead, is he? He's not dead." From her appearance, she had most likely finally faced reality, probably through her parents. She just refused to believe it. After waiting so long, this moment had finally arrived. I smiled cruelly, coldly interrupting her. "No, Leo Thorne is dead." Ruthlessly, I twisted the knife again and again. "And haven't I told you many times? Leo Thorne died." But you refused to believe it even once. Originally, if you had called the rescue team in time to save us, Leo Thorne could have lived. Vivian Hayes' eyes filled with tears, and she kept crying and shaking her head. "How can that be? Leo Thorne was such a healthy child. He was just smiling and saying he wanted a gift. How could this happen?" Hearing her words, I was furious. Right, that rare family outing was Vivian Hayes' attempt to make up for not being with Leo Thorne on his birthday. She promised to pick out a birthday gift for him. It was also during that outing, before they could buy the gift, that the earthquake struck. Leo Thorne was buried beneath the mall, never receiving his belated gift, nor the rescue he deserved. I grabbed Vivian Hayes by the collar. "Leo Thorne was healthy, but did you know he was pierced through the abdomen by a bar? He was just a 5-year-old child. Don't deny it any longer. You are the one who killed Leo Thorne." Vivian Hayes swayed, staring blankly at me, regret and guilt flashing in her eyes. Her lips kept murmuring Leo Thorne's name. I looked at her with disdain. "You've never been a good mother for a single day, so why are you putting on an act now? But there are some things I can show you." As I spoke, I took a box from the cabinet. Inside were only a few crude handicrafts, and some hastily drawn, childish drawings. "Although you can't even remember Leo Thorne's birthday, he remembered every single one of yours. These are what he secretly prepared for you for each birthday. Yet you never once celebrated a birthday at home." Vivian Hayes, ask yourself, are you even human? Vivian Hayes tremblingly took those items, looking at them one by one, her emotions completely unraveling as she collapsed to the floor. The drawings started as stick figures, a man, a woman, and a child, and eventually evolved into a colorful house, where a happy family held hands, with a large sun hanging above, and a small line of text below, "Dad, Mom, and I live happily together." That had been the happy family Leo Thorne dreamed of most. Unfortunately, Vivian Hayes had utterly destroyed it. Little by little, she began to cry and slap herself, cursing herself for not being human. Suddenly, as if remembering something, she desperately grabbed my pant leg, looking up at me with tearful hope. "Leo Thorne, what else did he leave for me? Even just a message?" Frowning, I kicked her hand away and answered truthfully, "Leo Thorne's last words were that he wanted to see you, but you refused. What did you say you were doing at that time?" Vivian Hayes froze, muttering to herself. What was I doing? She seemed to be trying hard to remember her actions then, but it seemed she could only arrive at a more cruel conclusion. For a child with no blood relation, who was merely startled, she abandoned the son who loved her so much. Even as he was dying, I watched her continue to lose control, uninterested, having delivered my crushing blow. I turned to leave, but I was blocked by Vivian Hayes' parents. What they wanted was obvious. People who built their wealth by marrying off their daughters would surely not let a wealthy catch like me slip away. Mr. Hayes spoke first. "What my daughter did before was indeed inappropriate. But Mr. Thorne, Vivian Hayes has been with you for so many years, hasn't she? Isn't a divorce like this unsuitable?" Mrs. Hayes chimed in. Exactly. There's no hurdle a married couple can't overcome. Well, definitely make Vivian Hayes break ties with Julian Vance. And about children, he's still young, he'll have more. Look how consistent they were. Not a single person here showed an ounce of grief or sadness for their tragically deceased grandson. All they cared about was the property Vivian Hayes could gain from the divorce, or, even better, no divorce at all. Even when Julian Vance caused a huge scene before, they never mentioned it, only asking me to be understanding of Vivian Hayes for Leo Thorne's sake. Now that their own interests were involved, they finally made a move. I rubbed my temples, not wanting to get further entangled with them. Don't even think about it. I am divorcing her, and as for the money, neither Vivian Hayes nor any of you will get a single cent. Their faces instantly flushed and paled. Furious, they wanted to curse at me. I simply handed them 2 business cards. From now on, if anything comes up, contact my lawyer directly. If you trespass onto my property again, I'll call the police. With that, I turned and left without looking back, planning to call security to have them all removed. But at the building entrance, I saw 2 unwelcome guests. Julian Vance and his son appeared to have rushed over, running to Vivian Hayes' side. Both were wearing wrinkled clothes. Gone were their expensive designer brands of old. Without my money, relying on Vivian Hayes, a socialite without a real profession, it would be incredibly difficult for them to maintain their former luxurious lifestyle. Not to mention, they were now burdened with the $3 million I was suing them for. No wonder they rushed over so urgently, seeing Vivian Hayes in tears. Ethan Vance, with a smug look on his face, comforted her. Aunt Vivian, don't cry. Now that he's gone, you can be my mom, can't you? I can be your only son. As he spoke, he opened his small arms for a hug. But Vivian Hayes pushed him away. You are not my son. Vivian Hayes shrieked instinctively. The little boy's face immediately flushed crimson. Looking embarrassed, Vivian Hayes, seeing Julian Vance frown, seemed to realize her mistake. She quietly added, I am sorry, I just miss Leo Thorne so much. Julian Vance, his face grim, forced a smile and comforted her. It's okay, Vivian Hayes, I understand. Vivian Hayes then directly ignored him, fixing her gaze on me. With red eyes, she began, Marcus Thorne, I'll agree to the divorce as you wish, but can you please tell me where Leo Thorne's grave is? I never really got to see him one last time. By the end, her tears couldn't be held back. This clearly panicked Julian Vance beside her. He tried to tug at her sleeve, but she roughly shook him off. Without hesitation, I flatly refused. Don't even think about it, Vivian Hayes. You will never see Leo Thorne again in this lifetime. He unworthy of being his mother, and I won't let someone like you disturb him. Regarding the divorce, I'll say it one last time. This is a notification, not a request. If you don't want more trouble, it's best you agree to this settlement soon. Before Vivian Hayes could react, Julian Vance shifted his attack to me. Marcus Thorne, Vivian Hayes has been with you for so long, and you're not leaving her any assets at all. What kind of man are you? I wasn't falling for that kind of trick. Was he really thinking about Vivian Hayes? He was clearly thinking about himself. So I responded with a smile, that's right. Not only am I not leaving any assets for you, I am going to make you regurgitate everything you've taken before. It was my money to begin with, and I have the right to decide what happens to it. And you, Julian Vance, freeloading off a married woman, what kind of man does that make you? That last sentence seemed to hit a nerve with Julian Vance. He bristled and leaped up, spewing threats. All right, if you're going to be this ruthless, don't blame us. Marcus Thorne, your day of regret will come, you just wait. I nodded indifferently. Yes, I'll wait. But they were right about one thing. This was just the beginning. Hell was what awaited them next. After that incident, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes automatically sided with Julian Vance. They seemed certain he could win this silent battle and extract a hefty sum of money from me, but they also had no choice but to band together for warmth. After all, I soon froze all assets under their names through freezing marital assets. This included countless properties. Previously, to take advantage of favorable relationships, both Mr. and Mrs. Hayes and Julian Vance and his son had actually been renting luxury homes under my ownership, so I naturally sent people to evict them all from the premises. Now, they probably had no idea which streets they were wandering. I only heard that on the day they were kicked out, several of them clung to the luxury goods in the house, refusing to let go, creating a very ugly scene. But soon enough, their triumphant counterattack finally arrived. I had been waiting for this moment for a long time. After all, the harder someone falls, the higher they must first be lifted. As I expected, they began spreading false rumors about me online, leveraging Vivian Hayes' reputation as the earthquake miracle. This was also why I had waited until now, and hadn't clarified Vivian Hayes' earthquake narrative. I wanted to strike them the hardest at the peak of their joy. A simple rebuttal to false claims wouldn't have much impact. Netizens' anger would dissipate quickly. Only public opinion that has been repeatedly amplified, and then instantly reversed holds the most power. My company's primary industry was media, so I was well versed in this. Sure enough, they began spreading rumors that I was unreasonably seeking a divorce because I resented Vivian Hayes for not immediately digging through the ruins to find me after she painfully crawled out. They even photoshopped images, claiming I had been cheating on her for a long time, and wanted to replace my wife, and that our deceased child tragically died because I hadn't protected him during the earthquake, shifting the blame onto Vivian Hayes as the wife. People loved to witness the downfall of the wealthy. During that period, my company's stock price plummeted. Even Sarah Davis grew restless, repeatedly asking when we could act. I calmly shook my head, telling her to wait a little longer. In secret, however, I had already quietly accepted interviews with several media outlets and announcements from the Joint Rescue Team, all waiting for the right moment to be released. I waited for Julian Vance and his group to swell with arrogance beyond their capabilities. Soon, Julian Vance and his group grew complacent. They were no longer satisfied with making me lose the lawsuit through public opinion. Julian Vance began to frequently play the victim in live streams, presenting himself as Vivian Hayes' friend, joined by Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. Throughout, Vivian Hayes simply sat silently to the side, saying nothing. They explained that her severe mental health issues were caused by me. After raking in money from wave after wave of viral attention, they used the excuse of fighting a lawsuit against me, a group CEO, to open online fundraising channels. Netizens' sympathy allowed them to rake in money and resume their extravagant lifestyles. But they didn't know that everything had a price. They also didn't know that the backlash of public opinion was the most terrifying. Before they could happily splurge for a few days, I launched my long-planned counterattack. The interviews I had recorded earlier, along with the Joint Rescue Team's announcements and rescue videos, were released all at once. In the interview, I spoke through tears. My only child, Leo Thorne, died in that earthquake, and he also died at the hands of his own biological mother. I was the one who painstakingly pushed Vivian Hayes out of the ruins, and I even saved the food I found there for her, rather than eating it myself. But after she was rescued, she directly led the rescue team more than 10 kilometers away to her first love, and even lead, claiming there was no one under our section of the ruins. My Leo Thorne, after rescue was delayed by nearly a dozen hours, missed the critical rescue window, and still passed away after being taken to the hospital. By the end, I didn't even need to act. Tears streamed down my face involuntarily, whenever I recalled Leo Thorne repeatedly telling me how much he hurt in my arms. A sharp ache in my heart would involuntarily sweep through my entire body, and the several media companies under my command also pushed hard together, sending the video of my breakdown to the top trending list overnight. Public opinion reversed in an instant. Just as much as netizens had sympathized and been generous before, they now hated Julian Vance and his group. A flood of highly aggressive comments poured onto their accounts, demanding they return the fraudulently obtained money. But how could Julian Vance and his group produce it? The hundreds of thousands raised through donations had already been squandered in a few days. They could only play dead, but their inaction was like a gust of wind, whipping public opinion into a frenzy that even spilled over into the real world. Now, walking on the streets, each of them was like a pariah. Consequently, they didn't dare to leave the house, the owner of the luxurious mansion they had rented, considering the intense public backlash, evicted them. So, the 5 of them were forced to cram into a tiny subsidized apartment. But soon, they were discovered by the netizens, who had doxxed and cyberbullied them. Their door was often painted with red spray paint murderers dye, and sometimes it had feces thrown on it. The police finally showed up, barely bringing an end to the farce. They were found guilty of fraudulently obtaining funds, and if they didn't pay back the money, they could face up to 10 years in prison. The public's apologies and sympathy for me also led to my company's stock price surging dramatically during that period, reaching several times higher than its previous normal levels. Even Sarah Davis looked at me, with a touch of awe. Actually, it wasn't me they should revere, but the internet. See how simple it is to destroy someone through the power of the internet. But this wasn't the end. The next time I saw Julian Vance, Vivian Hayes, and their group, they were in the detention center. They were both surprised and angry at my sudden visit, especially Julian Vance. He cast a sidelong glance at me, his face full of displeasure. "What? Are you here to gloat?" I glanced at a dazed Vivian Hayes nearby, saying nothing. She seemed to notice my gaze, regained some composure, and said, "We're sorry for what we did to you. And I am especially sorry to Leo Thorne. But now that it's come to this, what will it take for you to let me and my parents go?" I found it a bit ironic that a mother's grief over losing her son could be so fleeting. Her past guilt and sorrow had vanished so quickly the moment her own interests were threatened. but I still asked them, with a smile that didn't reach my eyes, how about I offer you a win-win deal? Vivian Hayes, if you agree to divorce and then marry Julian Vance, I can figure out a way for you to pay back the money you owe the netizens. Vivian Hayes froze, and Julian Vance stared at me in disbelief. Meanwhile, Mr. Hayes and Mrs. Hayes, who had been silent, loudly agreed, as if afraid I'd change my mind. I agree. We agree on Vivian Hayes' behalf. Seeing Vivian Hayes' indifferent attitude, I couldn't help but mock her. What? Weren't you eager to play mother to someone else's child before? Now, who are you putting on this so lifeless act for? Vivian Hayes opened her mouth, but in the end, said nothing. Julian Vance frowned. Looking at me, what game are you playing now? I smiled. Nothing much. Just think of it as me being incredibly charitable, of course. It wasn't charity at all. I just didn't want them to spend 10 comfortable years in prison. I couldn't wait that long. Finally, with my introduction, Julian Vance borrowed money from a private loan company, and had his prison sentence reduced to 3 years. After all, with his current reputation and heavy debt, it would have been difficult for him to borrow money elsewhere. But I didn't tell him that it wasn't a legitimate loan company. They were from a notorious overseas criminal network space, and they had plenty of tricks up their sleeves. Unfortunately, Julian Vance didn't know. He took on a lot of loans at once, even paying back my $3 million, and fully intended to default on the loans. Perhaps to escape debt collection, he voluntarily took on the charges alone, and went to prison for 3 years. Vivian Hayes was left alone with Ethan Vance, and 2 elderly people, constantly hiding to avoid debt collectors. The last time I saw Vivian Hayes, she was picking up trash on the streets. She looked so aged I almost didn't recognize her. She had a momentary flicker of joy when she saw me, because I had refused to see her since the divorce. But I didn't spare her another glance. I simply linked arms with my female companion, and, with a faint smile, boarded the black Maserati. Vivian Hayes' hope was completely shattered. She could only pin her last hopes on Julian Vance's life after he was released from prison. Unfortunately, she was wrong. The moment Julian Vance was released, her life utterly descended into hell. Because he had developed a gambling addiction, with just a slight temptation from the loan company, Julian Vance was hooked instantly, completely falling into the abyss. In fact, Julian Vance had developed a gambling addiction back when he was abroad, so he was hooked instantly. His so-called wife, who had supposedly died of illness abroad, had simply left him in anger because she couldn't bear his constant gambling. From the very beginning, Vivian Hayes had chosen the wrong man. Not only that, but Julian Vance himself had severe patriarchal views, and now he was the sole breadwinner and her legal husband. His former gentleness and pity vanished in the blink of an eye, replaced entirely by endless violence and emotional outbursts. Whenever he lost money, he would physically abuse Vivian Hayes. Even Mr. Hayes and Mrs. Hayes didn't dare to speak up, and Ethan Vance. Thanks to Vivian Hayes' previous unconditional indulgence, he had now grown into an unruly brat. Not only was he weighted on hand and foot, but sometimes he even became his father's accomplice, hitting and cursing Vivian. "Am I your son? Am I your son?" How many nights did Vivian Hayes stare at the moon by the window, weeping? She kept thinking, was this all she gained from abandoning the son she loved so much? However, Vivian Hayes' nightmare ended on a very ordinary morning. That day, Julian Vance and Ethan Vance didn't come home. No trace of them could ever be found again. Rumor had it that due to their gambling debts, which had snowballed out of control, they were seized by the loan sharks and taken to a notorious overseas criminal network space. After they had their organs harvested, they were sold and forced into cyber scamming operations as slave labor, beaten constantly every day. Vivian Hayes originally thought she could finally breathe a sigh of relief, but her mind became increasingly disoriented, and occasionally she would see Leo Thorne's shadow smiling at her. Only when she got closer did she realize it was Leo Thorne smiling and saying, "Mom, I don't want you anymore." That morning, people discovered a woman's body in the lake, having fallen in late at night. In her hand, she tightly clutched a child's drawing, soaked and unidentifiable.